Hey guys, it's Dr. May. I'm here with a new episode of Sensorimotor Psychotherapy videos. So this one's starting our addressing memory section. So we had just wrapped up building resources, and we're going to use that to help us as we address difficult memories in our life. Okay, so if you're ready to join us, if you feel like you want to give it a try, feel free. Otherwise, you could kind of just check out what I have to offer today and see if you feel like trying it. And if not, you could come back another time. Okay, so no pressure at all. All right, let's get the screen share going here. Okay, here we go. So implicit memory in your resource repertoire. Okay, so don't worry, I'm going to define all this stuff. We'll go over it plenty of detail today. Okay, so as you may have remembered, if you've seen some of my other videos in this series, that they talk about having 3 phases of therapy when we're working through trauma and attachment issues. So we finished the section on developing resources, which is number 1, and now we're moving on to addressing memories. But we're going to use what we learned in section 1 to help with section 2. Okay, so the goal of today is we're going to recognize the signs of implicit memory. So we're going to learn about what they are, and I'm going to give you a whole bunch of examples about it. So no need to be thrown by the difficult term implicit, okay? And then we're going to kind of put it together with some of the stuff we learned from the resources sections to see how the resources specifically can help us deal with the implicit lived memories that we have, okay? All right, so let's get started. So first we're going to do a little review about memories. Okay, and I did go over this in the video about procedural learning, but I'm going to do a quick review today. So that's why it says review in the upper left-hand corner. So first, let's start with explicit memories. So that means they're coherent verbal descriptions of events we can consciously recall. Okay, so it's when we can talk about something that happened. That's explicit memory. When we deliberately call to mind and we can think about it and we can say it out loud, okay? So there's 2 sections to this. One is called declarative or factual memory. So it's like declaring something. It's like saying a fact out loud. And that part has to do with stuff that's a little bit more neutral, kind of like facts you may have read about or heard on TV or seen in person, like something you saw at a museum and you're calling this fact to mind. Okay, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about you. Then there's what they call episodic, like an episode, or autobiographical memory. So if you think about an autobiography, it's, let's say, if I wrote an autobiography about me, it would be a book about my life. Okay, so an autobiographical memory is a memory that has to do with my life and something that I personally have experienced. So usually when we think about dealing with memories in therapy, we think about autobiographical memory, that I'm going to sit with my therapist and I'm going to talk about stuff that happened to me and describe it in words, okay? And that's usually most of the time how we imagine it. But in sensorimotor psychotherapy, we're going to deal more with implicit memories, okay? So what's that? Okay, sorry, a little stuck here. So implicit memories, one of the things that I was trying to think of to help describe it is the old Yogi Berra expression. It's like deja vu all over again. So deja vu in French literally means to see again. So when I'm experiencing something where I feel like I've kind of been through something like this before, it feels kind of familiar. Maybe it's a different person involved or it's a different situation, but it kind of has this sensation like I've kind of experienced this. That's like a deja vu. That's kind of related to implicit memories. Okay, so the word implicit itself means implied, but not plainly expressed. So it's not plainly expressed as memory like I'm saying it in words. It's just kind of something that I'm feeling that's familiar emotionally, or my body feels like it's felt like this before. Okay, so I also put in some song lyrics. I like old music, by the way, American popular standards. There's an old song, and the line in it says, "It seems to me I've heard that song before." So I feel like I've gone through this before. I'm not sure how, but it's something kind of familiar. So it seems to me I've heard that song before. It's from an old familiar score. I know it well, that melody. Okay, so that's kind of related to implicit memories too. So here's a breakdown. So implicit memories are brought about by a trigger. So it could be an external trigger, something that's going on in your life around you, a person you're interacting with, or some kind of feeling or physiological sensation you have. So it's triggering something, and then you're experiencing it in the present situation, but it kind of feels like something we experienced in the past, okay? So when we unconsciously, right, we're not deliberately calling up in words, we're unconsciously remembering this, we automatically reactivate and re-experience the same kind of building blocks that we experienced the first time. So remember the 5 building blocks: emotions, thoughts, body sensations, movements, and even the 5 senses, right? So when those same building blocks are activated now that were activated in the past, it makes me feel like deja vu, like I've experienced this before, I've seen this before, okay? And usually, although it's called an implicit memory, we're not consciously aware that we're remembering anything. We're just feeling sort of familiar, and we may just think this has to do with right now. It has nothing to do with the past. We may not even have made the connection, but in fact, it is connected, okay? So we think we're responding to the current situation, but we are actually recreating or implicitly remembering a past situation, okay? I realize this sounds a little confusing, so I have a bunch of examples for you. So sit tight and hang in there. Okay, so just to give a little more information here. So types of implicit memories. Okay, so one is emotional memory. So that's like the way I'm feeling now kind of feels the same as I felt in the past. Okay, and maybe I'm overreacting to something in the present, and my response is out of proportion to the current situation. But basically, in my mind, it's because I'm experiencing something in the past all over again. That's why it's super strong now. Okay, so that's a clue. Procedural memory, think of like a procedure. It's like a movement. It has to do with somatic body stuff. Okay, so I might be implicitly remembering my survival responses. So I might automatically go into a fight, flight, freeze, fold, or attach and ask for help response. And the reason why I'm going to that response is because the current situation is somehow very similar to a past situation when I use that same response. So I might jump up and want to fight right now because in a similar situation in the past, that's exactly what I did. Okay, but I'm implicitly remembering my fight response, and I'm getting up in somebody's face. Okay, approach avoidance behaviors. You might find yourself automatically wanting to approach somebody and kind of tell them like it is, or cling to them, or you might find yourself automatically wanting to pull away or avoid the situation in some fashion, because perhaps in the past also those are responses that made sense in a similar situation. So you're implicitly remembering how you approached or avoided by doing it again now. Other things, motor actions or physical patterns. So if you have a strong startle response, like something grabs your attention, boom, you might automatically go like that because something in the past you had to block to protect yourself. So that's a motion that you might implicitly remember, right? Just for an example. Also, it could be connected to other building blocks such as beliefs, habits, and even intrusive images. So you might have an image of something that pops up now that's related to something you've been through in the past. So you're implicitly remembering this flashback, so to speak. Okay. All right, hope this isn't too confusing. So here's another thing that could help show the difference, right? So an explicit memory is telling a story about the past, but an implicit memory is re-experiencing, re-feeling, and reliving the story of the past as if it were happening right now. So it's like I'm kind of an automatic pilot replaying it, okay? So that's the implicit part. And that's the part we're going to focus on more in sensorimotor psychotherapy, okay? All right, so here's a bunch of examples as promised. Okay, so let's look at the first one. So there's an older woman looking out the window. She's looking kind of maybe sad, dejected, lonely. And what's feeling similar to her is that maybe there's a time when she was a little girl where she also felt kind of sad, abandoned, lonely, rejected, okay? So maybe let's say the situation was she had a visit from her kids and she was hoping that they would stay for dinner and leave maybe 7 or 8 o'clock at night, but something came up and they had to leave at 4:30. And so she's feeling this strong sense of being abandoned. and left alone. And she's overreacting to it. Like, this feels like such a big deal. Like, I feel like, they're leaving me. And why am I reacting so strongly? Maybe because when she was a little girl, that same kind of thing happened, but with different people in her life. Okay. So the strong emotion she's having now is tied into the earlier emotion. Okay. Second scenario. So there's a woman in the dark. She's looking a little bit uncertain, a little bit maybe nervous. And maybe like she's thinking, well, what's the big deal? I'm by myself in the dark. Okay, but the doors are locked. I'm safe, right? I'm in a decent neighborhood. But somehow I feel like this uneasiness. I'm not sure it feels quite right. But maybe when she was a little girl, things happened in the dark that were painful, that were disturbing, that were abusive. And so the unease that she has now is exacerbated because of the stuff that happened in the past. So she's playing out that same feeling now that was an old feeling. Okay. So and the same building blocks are activated in both situations. I've been mostly focused on emotions, but sometimes the physical postures could even be the same and other physiological reactions, right? All right. So here's another really important one that happens a lot. Okay. So familiar people. So in relationships, we tend to play out certain patterns with different people in our life. Ever date somebody and you keep finding the same type of person, right? Why do I keep ending up with the same type of jerks? Like, they always seem like they're good in the beginning and then they turn into this, nasty person. And why do I keep doing that? Okay, so you're playing out an implicit memory with a person. That's why you keep getting attracted to the same people. Okay, that's an example of that. All right. And once you're with those similar feeling people, you start doing the same kind of things. Okay, so let's look at some of these scenarios here. So let's look at the upper left hand. So we could look at it from both sides here. So there's a man yelling at a woman. So perhaps they're a couple, right? So he's yelling at her and she's kind of cowering, looking upset. Okay. And so perhaps, when she was little, she was also yelled at in a similar way, maybe by her father. And she similarly cowered in fear. And because she couldn't fight back when she was a kid, she also maybe feels like she can't fight back now. So curling up and protecting herself is the response she goes to in the current situation, because that's the posture that helped her in the earlier situation. She just tried to curl up and make herself small and protect herself from the big aggressor, right? And maybe the guy too, maybe, he's playing out something his father did. Maybe he was the bully and now he's the bully. His father was the bully and now he's the bully, right? So he's playing out that similar situation. Okay, let's look at the bottom left. So let's say you're one of those two people, let's say they're coworkers, and there's a little bit of sneakiness here, a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe they kind of remind each other of brother and sister. Maybe they annoy each other in a similar kind of a way. So, they're reacting to each other as if they're brother and sister, but they're really coworkers. But maybe their little quirks annoy each other in certain kinds of ways, and they start going things like, stop, or things like that. Come on, stop it, leave me alone. And you realize you're saying the same things you used to say to your sibling, but you're saying it to a coworker, or you're feeling that same kind of that you felt when you were with your sibling. So that's another version of, playing out an implicit memory now. We slip into those old roles with new people. All right. What about feeling automatically comfortable or clingy with somebody? Ever meet somebody and you barely know the person, and all of a sudden there's like this enmeshed relationship? You feel like you've known them forever and you trust them way too much, and you start getting really close to them and really dependent on them and right away, because they're reminding you of someone from your past, right? So you're playing out that relationship template with a different person. And that process of doing that is considered an implicit memory. It's an acting out of an old relationship with a new person. Okay, you with me? All right, I hope so. All right, here's another thing that could come up. If you feel a physiological state now that's similar to one from the past, you might have other building block reactions connected to it that are the same. So let's say tightness in your chest. So let's say that was associated for you with a panic attack and being humiliated in front of your friends and, having, a code call, like in my hospital, they call it a code blue, like a medical code, and people are surrounding you and then they're telling you, oh no, you're fine, and whatever the humiliation was. So let's say now I'm feeling the same tightness in my chest and I have the same kind of anxieties associated with it because of that past experience, or the fear of being judged for it comes up, but I'm not even around anyone. But because I went through that emotional reaction is popping up with the physical reaction. So the fact that I'm re-experiencing that emotion now is a sign that I'm acting out an implicit memory. Okay. Or let's say the guy on the right, for some reason, feels a little dizzy. Right. So sometimes let's say I feel dizzy because my sinuses are a certain way and I had some dizzy spells. But let's say I associated that with being spun in a merry-go-round kind of a thing when I was a kid and losing control or maybe falling off and getting hurt. So I have those things associated with dizziness, and it creates more panic and anxiety and fear with my dizziness now. But it has nothing to do with being afraid of things right now. It's an old feeling that's now stuck with that physiological state. Okay, so that's just another example of how we could act out an implicit memory. All right, so our brain compares the present to the past, and then it tries to help us by reacting now as if we were in the past to try to save us some time. But sometimes it's a mismatch. Sometimes we're not in the same context now. Okay, here's another one. And this should sound familiar if you've been with me on this sensorimotor psychotherapy series. So let's say I do have a verbal memory of something, and the instruction is to remember something, as it has often been in some of the sensorimotor psychotherapy exercises. And as I remember it, I start to have a similar physiological response, a similar feeling, a similar kind of anxiety, the heart fluttering, whatever. And it's because now my explicit memory, my autobiographical memory, is calling up the implicit memory, which is the emotional and somatic memory. So it could be the explicit verbal memory can now trigger the implicit memory. Okay, so one could lead to the other. So if you want to experience it, just start thinking about something that maybe was a difficult thing, and all of a sudden the implicit will come with it. Okay, but only do it if you want to. Okay, no pressure. Okay, so inevitably, at some point, you may want to work with memories in therapy, but I do realize this creates a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. Okay, because chances are, you might have heard rumors about having to spill your guts and say everything, and you're going to feel the same terrible feelings all over again, which is kind of implicit memory, and it's going to be overwhelming, and it's going to drive you away from therapy because you're going to be so afraid of it. And it happens sometimes. Like if a therapist makes you do that and it's a bad experience, I could see why you would worry about that now. Okay. Fortunately, in sensorimotor psychotherapy, it's all about pacing yourself. It's not about overwhelming yourself like in exposure therapy. So there's ways that we do it where we kind of titrate the experience and give you like little manageable pieces at a time and use your resource to handle it. So it doesn't become this terrible, overwhelming thing. Okay. So here's some concerns that people have. So in case you identify with it, I hope you feel validated by us going over this today. So here's some concerns. So what if remembering the past will lead me to become really upset, triggered, and emotional? Okay, so we get really scared of that, right? We don't want to have all these bad feelings and not know what to do. And if I go through it, well, what if the memory work doesn't help me? Or I go through all that and then I'm just as bad as before, or maybe even worse. Okay, what if I feel like I'm losing control? No. Or what if I can't remember what I'm supposed to remember? Sometimes like you have a very vague memory of something, or someone told you something happened, or you just kind of like feel like something happened, but you don't have an explicit memory. And you think, well, what if I can't remember it explicitly? Am I ever going to get better? Okay, well, that's why we work with the implicit, because that's the more useful part to work with. Okay, so don't worry about that. And what if recalling the past will lead me to relive the past in a frightening way? Okay, so what if it calls up an implicit memory that's so frightening that I'm going to be overwhelmed, right? So this is all, legitimate concerns. So here's what we're going to do. Okay, so sometimes we want to handle it this way. So before we get to the other part, so we think, well, all right, so this is going to be that terrible. I should just avoid this whole damn thing. I'm not dealing with memories at all. Forget it. I'll skip that part and do something else, right? So why dive in? Okay, so I might shut my memories out. I might push them down. Okay, but that doesn't really work in the long term, because even if I don't deal with the verbal memory, I'm implicitly going to still act it out. Okay, can't escape the implicit. All right. So the other response is the kind of like the counterphobic response, like I'm just going to jump right in and do it. I'll just get it over with. I'll just expose myself to the memory as fully as possible. I'll get really scared, frightened, whatever. I'll just do it and get it over with, and because I know I need to do it to get better. Okay, but overwhelming yourself isn't going to help resolve and integrate the memory. Okay, that's not the goal either. Okay, we want to stay in our window of tolerance. Remember that? Okay. So the middle ground, okay. So forgive me, I'm using my DBT terminology because that was my first language here. So the middle ground, the balance between avoiding and flooding yourself, is to take small steps, right? So we're going to pace ourselves, do little pieces of the memory at a time, deal with the feelings that are brought up by the memory, which is the implicit memory, with mindfulness, staying in the present moment, right? So having one foot in the past, one foot in the present, which is a dual awareness, and kind of slowly going back and forth, using our resources to help bring us back into our window of tolerance as needed, and stopping when we need to stop, okay, and proceeding when we're ready to proceed. Okay, so it gives us much more control of the process and a lot more confidence that we can handle it. And so this is really a very smart way to do it. And it kind of alleviates some of the anxieties you might have, knowing that this is the way it's going to be handled. Okay. All right, so here's the exercises. All right. So the first thing we're going to try, if you're willing to try, again, you don't have to force yourself if you're not ready, but this is some of the exercises we're going to go over today. All right, so first, versus implicit memory. Think about, now that we defined it, right, some implicit memories, so somatic or emotional memories that we believe are affecting your current life. So how am I re-experiencing some of my past in my present circumstances? And then when that happens, how could I trace back and think, well, where did that originate? What was the past circumstance that's fueling my current circumstance and the current reaction I'm having to what's going on now? And then, of course, what coping resource can I use to kind of help me get back into my window of tolerance to kind of cope with it and not get overwhelmed now? All right, so here's an example below that was provided in the textbook, okay? So the implicit memory for this person is, I get really upset when people are not there for me exactly what I want them to be. Can anyone relate? Right? Oh no, like I called and he didn't call me back. What happened? Where's the return for my text? Okay, so obviously, right, that happens a lot. So why is that such a big deal now? Why am I having such a strong reaction if I don't hear from someone right away? Well, maybe as a child, I was left on my own a lot and neither of my parents really supported me. So because of that, painful experience in the past, it's fueling my strong reaction now and that implicit memory. So what could I do to change my reaction in the present, to change the way it's manifesting in my life now? Well, let's say this person decided that containment resource, so like preventing your anxiety from floating around, containing it by hugging myself, for example, was helpful, okay? Maybe having that hand on my heart, hand on my belly thing, which is more of a centering resource, is also helpful. Or maybe calling a supportive friend could be helpful. So instead of thinking about the parents who weren't there for me, or this person who didn't call me back right away, I will reach out to someone who is available to me, and I'll try to take that in now. And so those resources help to modify the way my implicit memory is playing out now. Because in the past, maybe I didn't have these resources at all. But now with the combination of these resources, it changes my reaction in the present and it helps me cope with it better. All right. Okay, so does this look familiar? It should. If you've been following along, this would be a familiar diagram by now. So there was an earlier lesson where we went over all of these in great detail, so I'm not going to do it right now, but if you've been practicing them already, that's great. If not, I would go back and review it. So for each category of resources, and we had to do an inventory of our resources in the past, okay? How can you use or have been using that resource? So how have you been using relational resources, somatic resources, emotional, intellectual, etc.? And how has the resource helped you? Okay, how has it benefited you to do these more often and to bring them back into your repertoire now? And so what's a future situation where they could help, especially in terms of dealing with your implicit memories, right? Because that's the theme of today. All right, so when your implicit memory is activated, how can I use a resource to help, just like we talked about here? Okay, next. All right, so this looks a little confusing, but I will explain. So we're starting up in the upper left. Describe 3 different situations or people that trigger implicit memories. Okay, so what's fueling some of my strong reactions in the present? For example, every time someone talks to me like my mother, I start to get a little edgy, right? Or every time I feel like I'm trapped and I can't get out, I feel a little anxious, right? If I'm in an elevator, if I'm in the middle of a row in a movie theater, I don't like that. I feel a little panicky, right? So why is that? Okay. Okay, so how does each trigger normally impact your building blocks? So in each of those situations, how are my thoughts, emotions, and body sensations affected? Like how do they, manifest right now? So that's the implicit memory, okay? So the trigger and then the manifestation, how it's coming out. Okay, so now I'm going to say, well, we're going to try to modify this experience a little bit. So now when I'm triggered, I'm going to go back to those original triggers I identified. What if, as I'm triggered, okay, I try using some of my somatic resources? So for example, what if I change my breathing a little bit? Or I connect with my back, I press my back against the chair, for example. I ground myself by pushing my feet into the floor. I align my spine a little bit. I self-soothe in some way, such as hugging myself, rocking myself. I use containment resources, such as wrapping myself in a blanket, such as hugging myself. Hand to my heart, hand to my belly, which is a centering resource. So if I did one or more of those, when I was triggered, how does that then impact my building blocks? Right? So it should have some kind of an effect, and you could try different ones and see which ones are more effective for you. Okay. So this is giving you some power to cope with it now and to change the automatic response that was happening before when your implicit memories were triggered. Okay. All right. So resource and reaction balance. Okay. So at the bottom is my lame attempt at making a shape art scale. Okay. I couldn't find quite the right graphic online, so I had to just try to figure it out myself. So anyway, so as we talked about, that relationships often trigger our implicit memories, right? So let's say on the top, I have just a couple of examples. So let's say there's a mother-daughter relationship that's a little triggering, or some relationship that reminds you of a mother-daughter relationship. Let's say a partner relationship, a co-worker or a boss-employee relationship, maybe some other kind of family relationship, father-son, or some other kind of thing in the family, or whatever it is for you, okay? So select a recent relationship dynamic that triggers an implicit memory of a past traumatic experience or distressing attachment relationship, causing you to feel dysregulated, right? So like I said before, let's say if someone starts to remind me of my mother, I start to get more reactive, more edgy, more irritable, because I'm reacting as if it's her. Let's say, someone criticizes me, all of a sudden I'm back to a situation where my mother's criticizing me, okay? So that's an example of a relationship dynamic now that reminds me of a past relationship dynamic, and that's why I'm overreacting in the present. So first, I'm just going to catalog my current reactions on the left side of that balance scale, right? So how does it impact my building blocks, my thoughts, emotions, body responses when I naturally react to this relationship balance without messing with it yet? And now I'm going to say, okay, well, what if I were to put some resources in the mix? how could that change it, right? And which resources might I want to use? All right, so it's a little similar to this, right? So when I'm triggered by that relationship dynamic, how could I use resources to then change my building blocks, but just a little bit of a different diagram, okay? So when you have a bunch of reactions on this side and you counterbalance them with resources on the other side, it kind of brings you back to your balanced window of tolerance, okay? So that's how you could kind of stack them up together. All right, I believe this is the last one. Yep, okay. All right, so this one, I know it's a little tricky. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. But I hope I gave enough examples to kind of explain the concepts for you. So if you're able to give it a try, if you're willing to, feel free. Otherwise, just file it away and try it when you're ready. Or if you think you're ready and you try it and you're a little overwhelmed, just stop and just go back to your resources, okay? So anyway, more memory stuff to come. Stay tuned and I'll see you soon. All right, guys. All right, have a good one. See you soon.